and deeply complex issue. The systemic challenges and the necessary reforms required to end child and forced marriages in Somaliland. We're grounding our discussion today in some quite powerful expert testimony and survivor accounts that really laid bare the multiple compounding barriers to change.
Yes, that material provides such a vital, and I agree, frankly, a heartbreaking look at the reality on the ground. It's absolutely clear that addressing this practice demands action on, well, every front: legal, social, institutional.
Absolutely, but, policy is about prioritization, especially when resources and, let's face it, political capital are limited. So the central question we face today, really emerging from this source material, is this. Given all these acknowledged barriers, from the legal gaps to those deep-seated social pressures, what is the single most critical and immediate priority for reform? Is it implementing a strong, unified national legal prohibition right now, or is it prioritizing investment in, say, decentralized community empowerment, support systems, and cultural change first?
I think the impulse to, pass the perfect law is understandable, but I hold the position that focusing immediately on new legal statutes, well, it will fail if the infrastructure isn't ready. My priority is immediate action on institutional support and building community trust.
And I hold the opposing view. The immediate necessity is achieving mandatory and clear legal prohibition. Without that foundational policy, all these other supportive efforts, however well-intentioned, are just structurally fragile. Let me lay out why the law must come first.
Please do.
Okay. The existing legal framework is, I believe, the key vulnerability. The material confirms that Somaliland recognizes 18 as the age of adulthood, yet we don't have a comprehensive law that explicitly criminalizes child marriage with strong, clear penalties. Now, this isn't just an oversight. It creates pervasive legal ambiguity. The lawyer and activist Yasmin pointed out that this ambiguity allows for varying, often conflicting interpretations by courts, religious leaders, elders. It effectively provides a legal gray area where these harmful practices can just continue unchecked.
I recognize that ambiguity exists, yes.
But this isn't just about clarifying the age. My position is that the immediate reform must be a comprehensive child protection and marriage bill, one that states plainly that marriage under 18 is illegal, full stop, and includes robust penalties. And crucially, this bill must enforce mandatory reporting obligations for key institutional authorities, like schools and hospitals, just as Yasmin suggested. This legal mandate is the policy mechanism necessary to force the issue out of the realm of, private family matters and into the public protection sphere.
I see why you prioritize the clarity of the legal framework. I do. But I just don't believe that simply passing a law solves the immediate problem. It feels like an insufficient response to the sheer complexity we've seen in the material. You talk about legal ambiguity as the primary barrier, but our source material identified two other equally massive practical hurdles.
Which are?
Well, institutional weakness. The police and courts, they lack the resources, the training, the basic capacity to handle existing gender-based violence cases effectively. And perhaps most significantly, that deep-seated social pressure. Families routinely bypass the formal state system altogether, right? They prefer informal dispute resolution managed by traditional elders. Now, if we immediately pass a strong prohibition law, those entrenched non-legal factors, the weak enforcement and the social bypass, will simply render the new statute moot on the ground.
You think new legislation won't change behavior?
Not in the immediate term, no. I don't think it can, effectively. That's why my priority must be tangible, immediate support for vulnerable girls. The survivor who spoke during the research, she testified so powerfully to receiving almost no support. She needed counseling, immediate legal assistance, shelter options, and none of that was readily available. We have to establish those safe shelters and emergency support systems first. And at the same time, we absolutely have to tackle the cultural narrative linking a girl's value to her marriage or virginity, which Awa specifically highlighted. These grassroots functional actions, these are the prerequisites for effective law enforcement down the line.
That raises a really fascinating policy debate. Let's talk about that intersection, the functionality of law versus, let's say, immediate social acceptance. You argue that the law will fail without community acceptance, but how do we ever break this cycle of social pressure and informal resolution without that policy pressure?
The mechanism you're referring to is mandatory reporting, I assume, which I understand is designed to force intervention.
Exactly. Without the state giving schools, hospitals, child protection services a clear, mandated mechanism backed by penalties to act decisively, they remain, well, passive spectators bound by community norms. The law, with its mandatory reporting obligations, is the only way to break that inertia.
Okay, I agree the law sets the standard, but I have major reservations about the viability of enforcing mandatory reporting right now, today. We just can't ignore the systemic capacity failures. Look at what the new law graduate Balkissa highlighted. Most families are unaware that forcing a girl into marriage could even be a criminal act. So how effective is mandatory reporting if the institutional recipient, the police, is already overwhelmed and untrained? And the community doesn't even understand the crime.
But capacity is always developed in response to a clear legal mandate and clear accountability. I mean, if we wait for the police force to become perfectly resourced and trained before passing the defining law, we'll be waiting forever. The law sets the priority for resource allocation. If the law says mandatory reporting exists, then the government must dedicate resources to training and enforcement systems, as Yasmin suggested it should.
I disagree that the law dictates priority. Resource scarcity dictates priority, doesn't it? Directing scarce resources toward mandatory reporting obligations under a new law when the infrastructure cannot even support existing gender cases, well, it means those efforts will simply dilute current strained services. We should instead immediately direct resources toward national legal awareness campaigns in schools and villages. We can make the community aware of the current, albeit limited right, while simultaneously building up the capacity of the police and courts to handle an influx of cases before we put the full weight of a new prohibition law on their shoulders.
I think you might be confusing the consequence of the law, an increased caseload, with the necessity of the standard itself. How can legal literacy and support systems fundamentally shift the practice if the baseline legal standard remains ambiguous and weak, if it enables different conflicting interpretations by judges or local leaders? The law isn't just about enforcement. It sets the ethical and moral baseline for society. If 18 is the age of adulthood, the law must explicitly and punishably reflect that, making the practice of child marriage unacceptable by state definition.
That is a compelling theoretical argument, I grant you. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the legal baseline is the immediate limiting factor for a vulnerable girl facing a crisis right now. Let me pivot to the second core barrier here, the humanitarian reality. For vulnerable girls facing immediate pressure or abuse, immediate, tangible, functional support is exponentially more vital than distant legal reform debates.
Can you elaborate on that practical necessity?
We heard the survivor testify that she received almost no support. She urgently needed counseling, legal aid, shelter. Imagine a girl who decides to refuse marriage today. A new prohibition law on the books offers her precisely zero protection if she has nowhere safe to go tonight. These practical supports, the safe houses, the immediate legal aid, they provide the actual safe space for girls to exercise choice and ensure physical safety, regardless of the penal code's current strength. If we invest in these support systems first, we give girls the physical ability to resist, which is, I think, the necessary condition for any law to eventually be useful.
I acknowledge the absolute necessity of shelter and support. There is no disagreement on the need for those critical services. But doesn't this bring us right back to the question of institutional power? Even if we establish shelters, if the father still holds the ultimate, however weak, legal justification to demand the girl's return because the law isn't ironclad, well, those shelters operate in legal peril. The law must define the crime and confirm the girl's rights to self-determination so that support systems can act with legal confidence.
I agree that they need legal confidence, but they also need community buy-in, which leads us straight to the third crucial area, cultural change and the role of leaders. The material shows really compelling consensus,
that we must engage religious and community leaders collaboratively.
That engagement is non-negotiable for long-term success. I absolutely agree.
But the timing is everything here. We need to focus now on providing these leaders with accurate, contextual, Islamic teachings, emphasizing consent, dignity, education, the positive argument for change. As the panel consensus and Awo's remarks suggested, when influential leaders advocate for change, communities follow. That creates truly sustainable shifts. This grassroots trust and moral persuasion, it has to precede effective state-level enforcement. A new law that is perceived as just a purely top-down, non-integrated mandate will simply be bypassed, maintaining the current preference for informal, community-level dispute resolution.
I agree that the policy pressure must unite with community trust. But I still maintain that if we focus solely on building trust and raising awareness, while the foundational legal framework remains weak, then leaders are only advocating for a suggestion. They're advocating for what should be done, not a unified national standard that is backed by the state's authority.
And you see that difference is critical.
It is monumental. Without that clear legal prohibition making marriage under 18 illegal, we cannot effectively dismantle the deep-seated belief, which Awa spoke of so eloquently, that a father's honor is linked to controlling his daughter's choices. If the state doesn't clearly say, this practice is wrong and punishable, the father retains the ultimate, albeit weak, justification to proceed under customary or ambiguous interpretations of existing law. The law needs to provide the leaders with the clear mandate to enforce the standard they are preaching.
I would suggest the policy pressure doesn't need to be criminalization first. It needs to be institutional accountability and resource provision first. Imagine the immediate impact if institutions actually function properly. If legal graduates like Bolkisa are providing free legal literacy and the community sees courts that are efficient, and sees safe houses that are reliable. That builds the trust in the formal system. That trust then becomes the social foundation that allows the new prohibition law to be enforced successfully when it eventually arrives. If the system is broken, the law is just a broken promise.
But the law provides the hammer to repair the broken system. The law makes the institutional weakness an unacceptable failure of the state. In summarizing my position, I have to conclude that the immediate prioritization has to address the root legal ambiguity by passing a strong prohibition law. The current framework is just too weak, too inconsistently applied, which makes every other effort to provide support or education structurally fragile. The law must define the crime, clearly and uniformly, before we can successfully combat the culture and build reliable support systems.
And I maintain that without immediately addressing the existing institutional weaknesses, providing safe spaces and emergency support for survivors, and building community trust through awareness and leader engagement, a new law will simply exist on paper. We are currently failing girls who need protection now, as the survivor testified so movingly. The immediate priority must be addressing the social realities and institutional failures that undermine legal authority, ensuring that when the strong law is inevitably passed, the system and the community are actually ready to enforce and accept it.
This discussion clearly illustrates that ending child marriage requires all parties, lawyers, activists, survivors, communities, to collaborate effectively.
Indeed, the source material shows compelling evidence for the necessity of both policy pressure and community action. Our disagreement really lies only in the crucial sequencing and the immediate allocation of limited resources, defining which step must immediately precede the other.
Precisely. And we certainly have more to explore regarding how these two urgent demands, legal rigor and social support, can perhaps be integrated more efficiently without delaying action on either critical front. Thank you for this rigorous discussion.